all included in that luggage. So the good news is that because they were consumable, that meant I was making room as I went along for things to collect along the way, like my little other things. So that was the advantage. We also, I'll show you a little later. So basically, we landed. Pardon me?
Tell us what did you take? How many pairs of pants? How many?
Sure.
Tops?
I took 2 pairs of pants and 1 pair of shorts and a long sleeve top and probably 2 long sleeve tops and 1 sleeveless and a couple of short sleeve tops and like a little sweater that could also be that. And I use compression sacks, and I meant to bring it and I didn't. Those are the packing cubes that you see, but they have an additional zipper. So what it does is compress the cube to be able to pack more things in if you're not doing the weight, So that was really helpful. And we might not know it, but you'll see in a photo, we had, both my husband and I had air mattresses for camping. Because we often were in hotels, probably a third to half the time, have a really hard bed. And so not being able to sleep well, so we use those a lot. So
What about shoes?
I brought 2 pairs of shoes. I brought some Crocs because one, we were going to do some water sports in terms of kayaking and sandy, rocky areas, but also the tile floors in bathrooms, and when you're walking and there's the rain or in the bathroom, they're very, very slippery. And so it had really good tread on it. And also I had I think they're called Hoka shoes that are like walking boots kinds of things. So that was it.
Wow.
So it's one of those things where, okay, you don't have to worry about what you're bringing because not much to choose from. We did have a, one of those laundry lines, that you can kind of do hand wash kinds of things. And then we found laundromats maybe once every 2 weeks or so, and we do a more thorough washing. But yeah, so feel free to ask questions and share your own tips as well.
And what time of year?
We left April 10th and got back June 12th. And it was unusually cold, so it was rainy most of May when we were in Turkey, which I was disappointed about. But it's one of those things where we were just grateful that when we wanted to kayak or do something, it was enough, or it wasn't raining at the moment. We went. Yeah, Claude.
Just for information, I have a cousin who's traveled extensively around the world, and on her trips when she's gone, she said when she showers in her clothes so they could get clean.
That makes sense.
She could be cleaned, and then
This is a twofer. Any other tips? Go ahead and share them.
or if take old underwear or
Right.
something and then just pitch it.
I've heard other people do that.
Yeah.
I probably brought 8 or 9 sets of undies because I thought, you know what? I don't care about other things, but I do care about my underwear being clean. And so I figured that I could, get by on a lot of things and just wash it, but I wanted clean underwear every day. So anyways, that was my, and also my splurge. We did land in Malta and also went to Gozo, and then we went to Egypt, and we flew into Cairo, and then we saw all the sites around Cairo and Coptic area, Christianity, but also the museums and Sphinx and pyramids. And then we flew from there to Aswan, which is the lower part, and we actually were on a cruise that went for 3 nights, 4 days, and we got to go to Abu Simbel, so I'll show some more things about that. And then we did go to Jordan because my husband's nephew and his wife was working for UNICEF in Amman, Jordan. So that gave us a home base, and he rented a car with their 2 kids. We could cruise around and went to Petra with them, the Dead Sea, and then we took the bus from there to Aqaba on the Red Sea. I have to say, we started planning it almost about a year in advance because if you want really cheap flights and lodging, you got to really do it in advance because those are the ones that are going to go more quickly. We had some miles, so we went from Spokane to Milan for $11 for the 2 of us. And most of our lodgings, when I looked at the expenses, averaged about $60 a night. So, and most of them came with breakfast. Yeah, Jack?
Susie, you set this all up yourself?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my gosh, and all of these bus trips and that you talked about?
Yep.
Now, did you arrange for those ahead of time?
Nope. The only time we had a planned tour was on the cruise. that the cruise had a bus and a guide, and we paid extra for that. But that was those 4 days were the only times we had, an organized, tour, something like that. We did pay for individual tour guides here and there, and we did, when we were in Istanbul, we did pay for a tour to help us through the Hagia Sophia Mosque as well as the Paki Palace. But those were just on, you can just line up while you're there. You can line up those tours. But the rest of it, we took ferries, we took buses, we took trains, and Turkey is very inexpensive, as you know, Margaret, and it has, I think, incredible infrastructure. So people are driving and staying in their lane as opposed to Egypt, where the traffic lanes are mere suggestions. and there's 2 lanes and there's another car going down the middle. I just close my eye the whole time if I had any taxi service. I'm like, okay, got him. And pedestrians, as you know, are walking in and out. Yeah, it was crazy. It was scary. I have to say, Egypt was the most scary place. I did not feel safe walking around by myself in Cairo, as I was mentioning to someone else, that school is not compulsory for high school, so there's a lot of, 14 to, 12 to 16-year-old boys just hanging out in the street, bored and panhandling and getting into mischief. And so I felt nervous there, but everywhere else I felt totally comfortable to walk by myself, yeah.
The one thing that I know when I was in Egypt, when we went to the museum there in Cairo, when we were coming out and we were meeting our group, we were sitting on this wall, and all of these Egyptian girls were there, and they were so excited to be around Americans.
Yes, yes.
And they wanted to take our pictures like we were the novelty, and I'm going, no, that's the novelty. It was weird because they were just so excited. Americans, let's take pictures.
They are very welcoming of Americans, and what I hear is that Americans are considered to be very friendly travelers. They also tend to tip better than Europeans.
That's true, I hear that.
And so it's kind of like, yeah, we like the Americans. But
And naive,
Americans are naive.
yes.
Okay, yeah, that's probably true too. But I did find that, with few exceptions, people did not take advantage of it. People really welcomed us. They made us feel at home. They were very helpful. I mean, I wandered, a couple times. We were living on the Asian side of Istanbul, which is called Karakoy. So we'd take a ferry to go into the main part of Istanbul, and I took the ferry by myself. I wandered the Grand Bazaar, which is the largest one in the world, by myself, and asked for directions when my Google Maps was, couldn't get good reception because of all the arches and, and buildings and things, and people were very helpful, very helpful. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. We did go to Rhodes as well, and I just mentioned that the Fertile Crescent is here in Turkey. So when you think about Babylon and Babylonia and Israel, this is where a lot of the old ancient ruins are, and I'll talk more about Göbekli Tepe, which is the oldest worship center in the world, is in southeast Turkey, and it's just above about maybe 30 miles from the Syrian border. So that was pretty cool. So one of the things I mentioned is that there's some pretty cool books about sacred geography, and Paul Devereaux has done a lot, as well as Martin Gray. And this is where you just experience all around the world. There are sacred places and caves and mountains and trees and waters. Those seem to be the common elements wherever people go. And The Sacred Earth is by Martin Gray, as I mentioned. And if you look at, I would really encourage you to look at his website, sacredsites.com. He has gone to probably 180 countries himself and lived there for months by bike and local transportation. He grew up in India he's American, but he has incredible resources. If you're ever thinking about traveling at all, I would really encourage you to look at his site, Sacred Sites. And he calls the sacred sites power places, as I mentioned earlier, because people have come there over the centuries to pray, and to experience God's presence. So we'll talk a little bit later, after we're done here, about what are your sacred places. What are the places that have nurtured you? So I want to hear more about that. So kind of be thinking about that. And what supports you to travel as a pilgrim, not just as a tourist. Now, obviously, we were tourists, but I think a pilgrim attitude is I'm open to learning, I'm curious, and I don't expect things to be just like home. You know, so in terms of, you know, amenities and different things, as you know, Margaret, it's, you know, you kind of live as locals do, and it helps me because when we were in Airbnbs, we're in local neighborhoods. And so we're shopping at the local stores, and that's where Google Translate is helpful, depending on where you are. So travel trips, be flexible. That we had a 3-flight segment going from Amman, Jordan, going to Cappadocia, and you know there was a flight delay on one of the segments, and then the other one was we were ready to go, and there was a storm, and the flight was canceled. And there was only like maybe 4 or 5 hours in between flights, and if you know anything about Turkish airport security, it's terrible. I mean, they are very, very thorough, and we thought, you're laughing, but it was like not worth it for us to go back out and go through security again. So as I mentioned, we had these, both of us, that was mine over there, and that was my husband, and we had our camping pads, and I had a shawl that was both a headscarf but also a blanket when I needed it to be. And we had eye masks because, you know, when you're 21 flight segments, you know, you're on a lot of flights and tired. So it was nice to be able just to put the eye mask on. It's very simple kind of equipment for easy travel. And you can see, and adapt and work with what is, because this was a plan, be willing to let it go. Originally, we had planned out every day and what hotel and flight and all those things. And our original plan was going to Sicily. And then my husband looked at it and goes, well, gosh, when I look on the map, Sicily's pretty close to Israel. Let's skip Israel, skip Sicily and go to Israel. Okay, I mean, we already have, you know, flight, you know, everything planned. Okay, and then we were planning to go to Israel, and we're looking at the news, and in April and in March, lots more bombings were happening, and literally our hotel, it was in the old city in Jerusalem, and it was 1/3 of a mile from the mosque and from the Wailing Wall. And that's where pilgrims were getting killed, and also the Israelis were going into the mosque, desecrating it, and beating up women and children in the mosque. And that was a week before we were going. So I said to Mark, you know, I think we should have a backup plan. And maybe we shouldn't go to Israel, because I'd gone there 51 years ago and spent 3 months there, but he hadn't gone. I said, well, you know what, Egypt's kind of close. Instead of going to Malta, what if we went to Egypt instead of Israel? He goes, I think that sounds good. So we switched gears, and that's when we went on the cruise. And so the point is, be flexible and willing to go. And this is actually a house I saw in Pamukkale. It was a neighborhood that sometimes you're on a trip and things literally go upside down. You know, isn't it funny? It's a real house in a neighborhood. So it's the point is, you got to be flexible, and you got to be willing to look at things in different ways. What's that? When we were in Malta, this is where I got confused between the Knights of St. John were supporting pilgrims coming from Europe to Jerusalem. And they were the order of the Hospitallers, so they were doing hospitality. And they were also protecting the tourists on the way who got sick, or also from bandits and other things. Now, I was confusing them with the Knights Templar. Both of them were formed around the same time, but the Knights Templar were always a militaristic order. And so there was some question about, since they were participating in the Crusades, could they really be a Christian monastic order? So as you know, because the Knights Templar amassed tons and tons of money in the 1200s, that attracted the attention of the King of France. So he found a way for the Pope to get them burned as heretics. So the Knights Templar don't necessarily exist, although the Masonic borrows some of their symbols. However, the Knights of St. John, which is called the Order of Malta, still exists today. And they're in over 100 countries all over the world. They serve people who are Christian and non-Christian. They answer directly to the Pope, and they are still providing service for people, for caring for the sick and the needy. Isn't that cool? So they're continuing. So it says something to me about those who are really providing service continue. Those who are focusing on money and wealth have a different outcome. So there were different castles, both in Malta but also in Rhodes, and you can see the knights, the Maltese cross with the 8 points that I talked about earlier. You can see that this is Jerusalem. Oops, sorry. you can see that this is Jerusalem here, and when the Jerusalem fell to the Muslims, then they went to Rhodes, which is about here, and then when the Muslims took over Rhodes, then they went to Malta. And Malta is a pretty incredible, it's just 2 islands, Gozo and Malta, but prior to the discovery in Göbekli Tepe, Malta had the oldest civilization that they knew of, that most of like the Hypogeum, which I've got one of the books here, and burial is about 9,600 years old. So twice as old as the pyramids and the Stonehenge. So pretty amazing. It was a crossroads because it's close to Europe, close to Africa. And so, you know, I was going to say geography is everything in terms of where you live, has such a crossroads of the culture here. The other thing when we went to Egypt is that we got to go to the Coptic Museum, and they have preserved some of the scrolls from the Hammadi scrolls in the Gospel of Thomas. So I got to see it, which was very cool, because in Hammadi area, it is dry. That's why the Dead Sea Scrolls survived. And, oops, the Hammadi is Nag Hammadi is right there. So it was on the Nile River. So that was pretty cool just to see how Coptic Christianity and the Library at Alexandria really preserved so many of the ancient artifacts of early Christianity. So that was pretty cool. When we went to Egypt, it was always amazing to see that the limestone is what was covering it, and then over time that's worn off. But if you see, these are like mud bricks. You know, you really get the sense of it's not just smooth. You know, some people have gone inside the tombs. We didn't do that. But we did go to the Valley of the Kings, which is along the Nile River, a little further. It's more outside Luxor, not in Cairo. And what's amazing is because it is so dry there, like the Nag Hammadi, that the 11 temples or 12 temples that are there that are mainly underground, these are like, you know, 3,000, 4,000 years old, but look at how bright and brilliant these pictographs are. That was amazing for me just because it was so ancient and it was so well preserved. We also, on the cruise, we got up. I have to tell you, the cruise was not relaxing, except for one day for about maybe 4 hours. We were literally up at 3:30 in the morning because we had to be on the bus to go to, you know, on tours. And Abu Simbel was like a 3 or 4 hour bus ride each way, and it was 102, 104 degrees in the desert. It is about 40 miles north of the Sudan, so it is truly desert. But yet, in Abu Simbel, in 1963, when President Nasser was building the Nile Dam, that's the good news. It provides incredible electricity for the local people, but it was flooding the Nile River right where the Abu Simbel temple was. So it was an international effort, I think, of about 120 countries. It took them over 5 years, and they literally, you can hardly see it, but they cut 20, 30-ton blocks and moved it about 40 or 50 miles out of the floodplain. And just seeing that is pretty incredible. You've seen that, Margaret?
Well, no, but I read in that whole National Geographic that they did back then, how they did that.
Yes. And what I loved about it is it was truly an international effort. It was Russia, France, Germany, United States, Britain, to preserve history.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
Which is really cool. So I love that that was an international relief effort. What struck me in one of the walkways in there is this Nubian-looking person. And what struck me is that I keep having to remember Egypt is part of Africa. And so northern Africa looks much more Mediterranean, a lot of Greeks and other Romans and other descendants. But if you're in Nubia, which is just south of where which was the north of the Sudan, then you have much more African traditional-looking features. And so the Nubians were a great power and had a lot of gold. And so when Egypt had some infighting about who's going to be pharaoh, and to tell you the truth, if you were the royal family, your lifespan was short because people were killing each other, wives, children, spouses, because this is money, and you want power. So when Egypt wasn't doing well, then the Nubians rose in terms of their power because they had gold. So that was just powerful to see. We planned to do a hot air balloon in Cappadocia, but it was literally 300 euros a person. So when they said you could do a hot air balloon for 75, I was like, I think we'll take it. And it was interesting because it was bad weather when we were in Cappadocia, so we would not have been able to go on a hot air balloon anyways. But in the hot air balloon ride, you could see, this is the Nile River right here, and a mile either way. This still has a little bit of green. You go a little further, it is absolutely bone dry desert. So when people talk about the Nile being the river of life, it was truly, and the flooding of the Nile is what fertilized the crops and irrigated them, and so that's why their calendar was truly about related to the flooding of the Nile. And the priests would often get tithes from the people to put in storage, but also it was to help people during times of famine and the poverty, that, you know, there was some equity that was happening because it was a part of their crops would be tithed to the priests. So that was pretty cool just to enjoy that. And we saw a little bit of one of the temples that's in the Valley of the Temples there. This is going to Jordan. And how many of you have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark? And you know that very famous scene where they're kind of coming out of the Sikh. This is called the Treasury. And these columns of the canyon are spectacular. Has anyone gone to Antelope Canyon in Arizona? Just the colors are just amazing with the reds and the browns and the blacks and the shadows. So it was pretty cool. We went there at night, and they had a light show, and that was neat to see that at night. We were with our nephew and his wife and 2 kids, so it was 6 of us, and I had brought my little mattress pad. So as we're watching the night show, we put the mattress pad down so we could lay down and look at it. It was very comfortable. And then when we got it up, Mark was like, man, this just reeks. And so when we came back the next day, you know, to do it by day, we recognized that where we were lying down was where the camels and donkeys were been pissing. And so I was glad I had that between me and them. But we was washing, it was fine. But it was pretty cool. This was actually developed by the Nabateans. And it's called the Treasury, and it was around, they were particularly in around 200 BCE to about 100 Common Era, and they were a nomadic tribe that was really collecting taxes as caravans were coming in from India and China into the Middle East, and so that's how they got their wealth. But this is sandstone that is carved, and I've got some photos here you can see for Jordan. Sometimes.
What was the name of that tribe?
This is the Naboteans, Naboteans. Yeah. So that was just pretty cool. So going on from Jordan, we flew to Turkey, and this is the turquoise coast in Turkey. So I have a little bit of a map there, but the turquoise coast, what I love is look at these shades of blues and greens. And so we got to kayak in one of the bays, Olindis near Fethiye. And what I loved is that if you can see it here, this is a Muslim woman with a friend of hers, and she's completely dressed with long sleeves and long pants and her hijab, but she's swimming in the water and she's kayaking. And I just loved that sense of just go for it. So that was fun. So when we got to Istanbul, on the left here is the Blue Mosque, and this is the Hagia Sophia. And there are ferries that are like little gnats, just go all over Turkey, and they're cheap. They run like every 15 minutes, and it costs, we had like a Istanbul pass that we bought. It's like maybe 50 cents to take a ferry. And so you just go all over. Yeah, it was amazing. And so when you'll see some photos here on the Turkey one that have the inside pictures of the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. So I have the Blue Mosque on the left and the Hagia Sophia on the right. But just the intricacy of the tile work and the gold, and probably most of you know that the Hagia Sophia was originally a Christian church built by Justinian around 534 AD, and then when the Muslims took over, then they turned it into a mosque and built other mosques. And for a long time, it was that, and then in 1924 or so, Kemal Ataturk, who is known as the father of modern-day Turkey, turned the mosque into a museum because he wanted it to be public access. And then unfortunately, I think in 2020, Erdogan turned it back into a mosque because he was trying to woo the more conservative parts of the Turkish citizens. But still, tourists could visit during times that weren't prayer. But everyone has to take their shoes off, and women always have to cover their heads. But they were very welcoming, and in the Hagia Sophia, there was one place where it was like a little brochure rack of kind of like a little proselytizing for Islam. And so I had a little conversation with them, and they were really focusing how Jesus was a prophet. You know, they weren't honoring him as Son of God, but they were honoring him as a prophet. And I said, well, I honor Jesus as a prophet, and I'm a Christian. They're like, really? You know, it wasn't like an evangelical one, but I wanted them to know that some Christians really do honor Jesus as a prophet. It can be more than that, but I certainly honor him as a prophet in that lineage. So that was cool. Now, in Şanlıurfa, which is southeast Turkey, where some of the earthquakes were, the Islam tradition is that Abraham was born in these caves in Şanlıurfa. The Hebrew Bible describes Abraham being in Ur, near Babylon, and coming several thousand miles to Haran, but they celebrate that he was born there. And you can see right here all these fish. This is called the Pools of Abraham, and it's considered good luck if you feed the fish. So it's a very conservative area within Islam. So I made sure that I had my long pants and long shirt and wore a scarf when I was cruising around the markets and things. And that's, again, Göbekli Tepe is very within 15 to 20 kilometers of Şanlıurfa, and Haran is also about 30 kilometers away. And these are the beehive huts that was built around Abraham's time. And you can see this is the inside of it. But we were there on a hot day, and it was amazingly using natural ways to keep it cool. So there's just wisdom sometimes. I think some parts of Africa, maybe, you might have noticed that, Margaret?
It's all over the world.
Yeah.
People are really smart.
Yeah.
Really smart to adapt to the weather.
To adapt the weather without using, air conditioners and all that, but still be comfortable. So we have a lot to learn about how people do things very simply without low impact on the environment. Now this is Göbekli Tepe, and I mentioned I have the book, and I have some books here if you want to take a look. But this is considered the oldest worship center in the world. So this is 11,600 years old, and it was only really discovered in the late 1960s by Klaus Schmidt, who was a German archaeologist. And there's some nearby sites within 45 miles or so called Karahan Tepe, and some others that they think are even 1,000 years older than here. But the point of it is that it's throwing archaeologists kind of upside down, is that they thought in the past that people had an agricultural society, and from there, then they wanted to worship together, so they did some worship things. This is saying, no, they created a worship center first, and people then came to it, and then they had to develop some farming to support people who came to that area. But they're pretty amazing. I mean, this is 11,600 years, and look at the detail of this carving. So there's lots of little circles in this area that's kind of protected now.
So that's because it's so arid there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Susie, what part of Turkey? Is that Turkey?
This is in Turkey. This is about 15, maybe 20 kilometers northeast of Şanlıurfa, which is on the southeast part of Turkey.
Southeast part.
Just above the Syrian border.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
So not on the Mediterranean.
No. Yeah. And that's where our driver gave us the Şanlıurfa Museum book. And he also gave us this other booklet from a friend of hers about Göbekli Tepe. Yeah, it was pretty incredible. We also, as I mentioned, went to Ephesus. And I have to say, if you're flying around Turkey, buses and trains are very cheap, very on time, very clean, efficient. But Turkey's a big country. So if you can, fly. Because flights are cheap. We could go from one end to the other for $50 to $75. So it was worth it to do that versus, 12 hours on a bus or something like that. So we went to Ephesus. This is considered the library of Ephesus. And not too far in that same complex, this is the temple where Paul was preaching, and it held 2,200 people. And what was cool is that I could stand in the center there, and you could hear the acoustics so incredibly well. And that was true all over the Mediterranean. The Romans were incredible builders. They built the amphitheaters into natural hillsides where there was, the back there, and so that they could do the acoustics. Just pretty amazing. And then I mentioned about Mary's house in Ephesus. So that whole thing of we did take, you can do, you can, as a traveler, you can always do expensive things, you can do least expensive things. We wanted to see the Bosphorus, so we literally got on at the very beginning, and we took the Bosphorus, which is like about a 6-hour cruise, and then it goes all the way to the Black Sea. It doesn't quite go to the Black Sea, so I got off at the furthest stop, and then I rented a taxi. I went to the Black Sea because our Ukrainian guests were from Odessa, and they from the Black Sea, and I just wanted to put my toes in the water and to say, I'm praying for you, extending my hands as I was in the Black Sea. So that's kind of just in a nutshell, but I'd be curious about what, questions you might have. What are some of your sacred places? Just ask away.
I'd like to go back to some of the books that you were referencing.
Yeah.
I didn't get.
Okay.
By Gray, what was?
His book is called Sacred. His website is sacredsites.com.
Sacred Sites.
Yes, and
Okay, is it S-I-G-H or S-I-T?
yeah, can you do that? That'd be great. And also the Sacred Geography by Paul Devereux. He's a British guy. Does a lot of work out of Wales. And just the hidden codes. He believes in the sacred geography is where the physical world and the worlds of spirit and soul meet. Isn't that a great description of sacred geography?
I have a question.
Yeah.
About Hagia Sophia.
Mhm.
When you went in,
Yeah.
could you wear pants?
I can wear pants.
I didn't. I couldn't.
Really?
I was there, but I was there in the 70s.
Ah, okay.
I had to have a skirt on.
Ah, okay.
So fortunately, I had one in my backpack.
Yes.
Little skirt
Yeah, and
below the knee.
as Margaret is mentioning, the little clothes that I bought, they had to have multi-purpose. But I did have just an easy skirt with, it was just elastic waist, and it went down to about here. And I also did it so that I could, if I was getting out of the water, because we went snorkeling in the Red Sea, I could just put that on top over my wet swimsuit. And I did have, those, like in the winter when you wear the H2O heat, kind of undershirt kinds of things that were black. Again, lightweight, but would cover. And so and a scarf. I did, think I mentioned to someone else during the potluck time that when we were in Aqaba, I had my black skirt on, my long sleeve, black shirt, and just a scarf on, not a hijab. And I was by myself for a moment because I was going to the post office to find, it's not easy to find postcard stamps or a post office box. So I found it. I found two different times, women in full burqas with addressed me in perfect English. Hello. It was very cool. And so I had this sense of, because I was dressed respecting their culture and I was alone for the moment, that they felt comfortable, and I had said salam to them, peace in Islam, that they felt like there was a connection there, but they initiated first, which was very cool. It's like you have those little moments that touch your soul and your heart because people made a point to say, we see you. Yeah.
One Sacred Sites, is it S-I-T-E-S or is it S-I-G-H-T-S?
Let's go back. It's Sites, S-I-T-E-S. And his book is called Sacred Earth, Places of Peace and Power. But again, his website is incredible. Yeah. Yeah, Margaret.
Well, you did go to Israel, though, right?
Not on this trip, but I lived in Israel in 1972 for 3 months.
I was curious because when I was traveling over there, if you went to Israel, then you couldn't, something about the passports.
Yeah, you can't get it. You
You
can't, if you go to Israel, here's the good reminder, is that you don't get your passport stamped with an Israeli stamp, otherwise you can never go to an Arab country. So what they do now is that they have a separate piece of paper, not a page, just a separate piece of paper loose. That's what you get stamped with if you're going to go to Israel. Yeah, word to the wise. Otherwise, you have to get a new passport. Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
Did you have any hassle with panhandlers? I've been in India, traveling to India, and they were just kind of a bane of anywhere we went.
That was true in Cairo.
Yeah.
And I did not, like I said, I didn't feel safe in Cairo by myself, but I did not experience, thank you, I did not experience that at all when I was in Turkey or Jordan or other places, just in Egypt. And I think of, I was mentioning to someone else, Egypt has incredible treasures, and I think is really worth seeing. But because it's a really poor country, people are desperate, and they don't have the same infrastructure that the other countries we went to. And they've developed what is called the bakshish culture, which is a tip culture, which means that if I ask Margaret for directions, it's like, well, where's my tip? Which for me limits human kindness of just, person to person. And so I was reluctant, because, and not that the money was that, wasn't that much expensive, but it just bothered me to have to feel like every time I ask a question, I got to pay for it. And I did not experience that anywhere else, that everyone was so kind about directions or helping us do, find things or whatever. So I do feel like out of desperateness, sometimes people can kind of like, you get an immediate reward, but in fact, in the long term, you lose people because of that attitude. That's my personal opinion.
Did you have a favorite place?
Yes, Fethiye. Fethiye is on the Turquoise Coast. And what I loved about the Turquoise Coast, particularly in Fethiye and also in Antalya, is that here you've got these beautiful, beautiful bays along the Mediterranean. They are I'm not exaggerating, we timed it, 3-mile walkways with no hotels at all along the beach in both areas. So what it said to me is that people are more important than profits. There were some restaurants, there were a few private beaches, but for the most part they were just open so that people could, and there was the ocean, the beach, sunbathing, whatever you want to do, water sports, and then some restaurants, and then a block or two away were the hotels, and in between were parks. So there was basketball courts, tennis courts, kids are rollerblading, bicycling on little pathways, and that was, like in Fethiye, there was several bays like that went for 3 miles at a time. So you could really walk comfortably and not, feel like your view would be blocked because you weren't a hotel, patron or something like that. And I just loved all the infrastructure they had for kids. Especially in Turkey, all the, the tennis courts, the bicycling, that says and playground equipment for kids that was in good shape, really good shape. And so it says, yeah, their people are being cared for. Now they've got some other issues. We were there during the elections, and there was only a 5% window where Erdogan won. And somehow the people in the south, Sami Urfa and Gaziantep, that had been displaced, like 1 or 2 million from the Turkish earthquakes, they somehow couldn't find a way for them to vote. And that 5% would have made a difference in the election. And Erdogan totally controls all the state government, radio and TV and media and everything else. So in this year, it was a runoff. It was a very close election, just a 5% difference. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah.
I was there in 2011, 2012, and then just last year. And I saw a huge difference from 2012 till this last year in terms of the conservativeness of the people on the streets. Many more people very conservatively dressed.
Yeah.
And it broke my heart to go into the Hagia Sophia because when I'd gone in 2012, I could wander all over the place. And last year, when I took my partner with me, he could go into some of the parts that I could not.
Really?
Go into.
Okay.
And we couldn't go up on the second floor at all.
Right.
It was closed off.
Right.
And the number of mosques has increased exponentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing that was really sad for me is I had made a very close friend in Turkey when I went in 2011, who I'm still very close with. And he and his family live not far from Nicaea, which
Mhm.
isn't called Nicaea anymore.
Okay, Iznik.
But it's where the Nicene Creed was.
Mhm.
And we went to the place where they made the Nicene
Mhm.
Creed, and they pretty much hide anything to do with Christianity there. There's not even, there's a sentence in a plaque that says this was something, you know, but even all the beautiful artwork and all of that, it's just kind of, they're allowing it to be destroyed.
That was really disappointing. We had hoped to go to Nicaea. We got as far as Bursa, which is about an hour away.
Yeah.
And Bursa was on the silk caravan trading route. And in fact, in around 500 AD BCE, Common Era, they actually smuggled silkworms and found that they loved to eat the mulberry bushes that they grew in the area. So Bursa became the silk capital, you know, in competition with China. And so, you know, we could, you know, stop at the old caravan routes there. But we bought one of the tiles that are sold there that are from Nicaea or Iznik. And those are the beautiful tiles that you see. But certainly the conservatism, and that's why Ergodon has been pandering to turning, you know, churches into mosques, because it's really that conservative group. And at the same time, like we experience in our own country, I experience greater polarization, like more and more conservative, and in some areas, very liberal. Like when we were in Katakoi, it was a more liberal, I would say, suburb of Istanbul. But walking down the street, I would see women in full burqas. I would see some women with just, you know, very modestly dressed with a hijab. And then I would see gay, lesbian, and queer transgender people also walking down the street. And it was like, okay, well, this is a lot of diversity, you know, and a lot of tolerance. This is in Katakoi, in Istanbul. And that was the, you know, that pocket was voting for Kemal, you know, so not for Erdogan. So there's definitely, like in our own country, you know, all those things. But I was amazed to see that level of tolerance. Yeah.
What were your thoughts about Malta? I'm hearing things about, and I haven't been.
I loved Malta. The hypogeum, if you can see on this poster over here about Malta, and I have this book over here, the hypogeum is around 5,500 years old, but the part that's really cool is that it's a burial ground, and it's underground, and you have to get special tickets that were a little pricey to go to, but it was worth it. In the underground part is called the Holy of Holies. And this is where these red ochre spirals are. And in there, because of the, you can pass around if you want, in the Holy of Holies is set up with this dome where the acoustics are amazing. So it was a group of, they only allow 10 to 12 people at a time to kind of go through it. So I kind of hung back a little bit, and I just went, and it just reverberated through the whole chamber. And just seeing these red ochre spirals, you know, kind of it's like goosebumps kind of hearing that and just knowing that this was truly a sacred place. And I had gone to Lascaux Caves in France in 2019, and I got to see the Lascaux Caves that also has that red ochre handprints and spirals that are in those caves as well that are very, very ancient.
In France.
In France, mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's so many civilizations that pass through there. It's just got to be completely mind-boggling.
It is.
Architecture and everything.
It is, and I really liked where the old San Anselmo Fort is, which is where, you know, the Muslims were fighting the Crusaders and the Knights of Orders of Malta and that kind of thing. There's an incredible museum there where they have literally, I think, 6 or 7 different, almost like buildings that are geographical and that are by time. And so they have the early roots in terms of these early caves. And they used to think, until Göbekli Tepe, that Malta had the oldest, some of the archaeological finds until they discovered Göbekli Tepe. But then it included, you know, World War II, and Malta was the most heavily bombed island in the entire World War II. Why? Because of its geographic location. So that's why looking at a map is really helpful, because it's close to Africa, close to Greece, close to Italy, and during World War II, both sides wanted to have landing strips. They wanted for air, and they also wanted to have ports for their naval. And so everyone was bombing the hell out of it. Yeah.
Surprising that all of those antiquities managed to survive.
It is, and I think partly because they were below ground enough. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Did you go to Sicily too?
We ended up not going to Sicily, maybe another year, another time. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions?
It was worth the 4.5-hour drive out and back from the cruise in the Nile to go where you went?
For me, it was. My husband said, I don't think so. But I have to tell you, I'm a better tourist, or at least I'm a more willing tourist, because it was something incredible
Yeah,
just to see those things in person versus just photos.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Where did you get your mattresses, these blow-up mattresses that you get, because so often they puncture and they're not good.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. I don't think it was REI. I think we got it. Maybe it was REI or we got it online. But we've had other mattresses, like you say, will puncture and they don't hold. And these ones worked really well. They're small. They're like this, about almost like a large sausage roll. They're about this big and about that wide. And I had also a compressed pillow because I find that, certain things on your travels, if you can't sleep well, it's hard. And I find that most pillows are too thick for me, and so I'm getting a headache. And so I wanted to have my own, has like a little waffle kind of, anyway, it's like a mattress pad thing. Anyway, I just find that, and then also when you're on the bus or the train or the plane, having your own pillow is really, really handy. Plus the eye masks, the eye shades are great. So those are the two things I would really recommend for packing. And then again, we had Google Translate, which was really handy. We could, download before we went for Turkish, and mainly we just needed it for Turkish and a little bit of Egyptian. The other ones spoke English pretty well. The other thing is that we have AT&T on our cell phones, and we decided when we were walking the Camino, we did the Portuguese route, the last 85 miles or so in 2016. We were there in 89 days. We landed and they said, well, how long are you going to be in Europe? I said, I don't know. And they said, well, you can only be here 90 days. Okay, we'll be here 89. But we were literally going into a place and we would exchange money. And Charles Schwab is great because they don't charge you for any kind of exchanges. So if you just put money into a Charles Schwab account, you can withdraw local currency and not have to pay, $5 to $7, for every exchange that you're doing. The other piece is that we were getting new SIM cards for our phones, which adds up, and they didn't work very well. And so this time we said, you know what, we're going to be in 5 countries, different locations, and we don't know. So we sprung for the AT&T International plan, which ended up being $150 a month for the 2 months that we were gone for both phones. So that meant we had unlimited text, unlimited data. We could call each other with no phone call charges. People could call us in the United States with no fees at all. So sometimes when you look at the scheme of things, sometimes there's some little things like that for me were a safety issue, but also a convenience issue. And, the fire, we just, after 40 hours and 4 flights, we landed in Malta, and we're just going to bed, and we get this phone call from our duplex neighbors that we own a duplex, we live on side, and then they said, the fire alarm is going off in the basement where the Ukrainians are living. And we're like, holy crap. So we were really grateful that we could talk with them and figure out what they were willing to do to help us out, And so it's things like that, I think some extras are really helpful.
And your international smaller suitcase, where did you get that?
Online, Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah, but you want to make sure, because they are really, more and more you'll see those luggage bins where they are measuring it and they're also weighing it. Wow. And the other thing we did was, because we both had one of those rollies, and then and my husband actually had a second rollie. And so we bought some duffel bags on Amazon that met the max requirements of what you can have for a duffel bag, and they fit our rollies and my luggage thing into one. So instead of paying for, more for luggage, it was just one checked bag. So there's little things like that made a difference when you're traveling, because that adds up, because we had 21 flights segments. So.
What about the food? Where did you like it? Where did you not?
I would say that I like the food better in Greece than I did in Turkey. And I'm not a big fan of lamb. And what I found is that in Turkey, they would often mix the hamburger meat or other red meat with lamb. And for me, it just imbued the lamb. So that wasn't great for me. I think I lost weight on the trip. But we were also walking a lot. I did find, though, that most of the hotels we stayed at, came with breakfast. And breakfast was normally very extensive. They had meats and cheeses and breads and yogurt and typically hard-boiled eggs, if not omelet or something else. Their meat is looking like bologna, kind of that red-colored meat, so I didn't eat that very often, but I ate the other things. So that was good. And we often, we had a couple of Airbnbs, and we had like a little boiler pot that we could bring, so if we want to boil water for hot coffee, and we've put in, other things when we need to. And like I said, we did what I call grocery dining, where you go down the marketplace and you get yogurts and cheeses and meats and, fruits and vegetables and salads. So that was good.
So how about water, drinking water?
Drinking water was an issue. So everywhere we went, we had to get bottled water, even to brush our teeth. Yeah. So that, that's I have to say, that's one of the conveniences coming home, was like, wow, I can, do things out of the tap here, whereas that is not true elsewhere. Yeah.
Do you travel every year somewhere?
No, not every year. Probably every 3 years we've kind of done a major trip. Partly it feels like, okay, I've spent this much money to get there in terms of airfare. I'm going to see things. Because once you're there, you can see a lot of things pretty cheaply. Like when we met, like I said, we met one American couple in 9 weeks. Most are Brits and Germans and others. And the Brits were saying that there's a direct flight from London to Istanbul for $200 that takes 4 hours. So if you can get, to Europe, particularly, some of the hub cities, then you can travel within Europe or other places very inexpensively, but flights from the U.S. are very expensive.
Turkey's in the EU, isn't it?
Yep. Yep. Other thoughts? Well, you're welcome to browse at the books or any of the things here. Yeah, and so thank you so much for your time and your willingness to kind of just be curious travelers and build bridges, right? Be curious. Thank you.